Learn how to play Cthulhu Wars Duel, now with 100% less terrible, bad pun-filled intros. Come on back after the break. Hey everybody, welcome to the show, Board Game Reviews. This is a YouTube channel based on the tabletop gaming hobby and all about the tabletop games we enjoy playing. In this video, I'm going to teach you actually how to play Cthulhu Wars Duel. If you want to actually just see a quick overview, see some sample gameplay, or actually just see my final opinion of the game, check out the other videos in the series. In this video, we're going to do a total tutorial video only. Now, I'm going to assume you're not familiar with Cthulhu Wars when it comes to this video, but I'm going to make a couple different references just for the people who are, to kind of make it so you can switch from one game to the other pretty darn quickly. And then in the video, I'll do a quick little recap, actually just covering everything that's different between the two games. So if all you want are the differences, skip forward to the link, or actually I'm going to leave a link to the timestamp down below. It allows you to skip forward into the video where I just go over those couple different differences for the basic rules of the game itself. Now, Cthulhu Wars Duel is an area control majority game based in the works and the writings of H.P. Lovecraft. Players can control a great old one from the outer planes whose grand goal is to take over the planet Earth by bringing ruin and doom to our planet. Whoever bring the doom track all the way up to 30 points is bring about the end game. Then after the players add in their secret victory points, whoever has the most doom is going to be the grand winner of the game. Now, this is a very asymmetric game. At the beginning of the game, every single player needs to have their faction. Now, the base box itself right now only comes with the 2 factions, but there's more factions coming down the line, more of these base boxes, which will bring out more maps, more factions. It's all going to be compatible. So my goal of this video is to be a little bit broader with my descriptions, because some of those powers from other factions are going to play a little bit differently. So I'm going to try to cover as much as I can without doing too much of the talky, which is going to be very, very boring to people who just want to learn how to play this game box itself. So the very first thing you need to do when you play Cthulhu Wars Duel is obviously you need to set up the map, set up the elder signs all face down so no player knows exactly which elder sign is placed in which spot. Place the gates and the dice with an easy access for all the players. Then every single player needs to pick a faction. Every one of these factions also has a setup on them in case you forget, but basically every faction is going to start with 8 power, and they're going to start with one of these gates at a location on the map marked by your specific sign. So again, I'm trying to cover all the different factions here. So for example, Great Cthulhu starts right here. Black Goat starts right here, but if you're the Windwalker, you would start here, or all the other factions. Basically, just look for your symbol. You're going to place the gate down, then you're going to add all 6 of your cultists onto that location with 1 of your cultists on the gate itself. Now, just to make an allowance for video on the fact that video is not always good at picking up 2-dimensional tokens or very thin or anything like that, I am actually going to use 3-dimensional miniatures from the basic Cthulhu Wars game itself. Now, please understand these miniatures do not come with Cthulhu Wars Duel. I am doing this purely for the camera itself, and just so it's much, much easier for you, the audience, to see all these tokens and see all this gameplay, because it's going to be a lot easier to see something that stands up 3-dimensional than to see a small token that on a camera is probably going to blend in and be a little bit of a challenge for you to see. So understand I'm going to be using these miniatures, but do please, again, just to re-emphasize, these miniatures do not come with the game. They are from the standard Cthulhu Wars box itself. I'm going to place these off to the side, and just remember, every reference I'm going to make to cultists is going to type out the cultist 2D tokens itself, but for camera purposes, we're going to have these nice 3D models. After every single player has their faction and their cultist and their gate on the board in our starting special section, we just need to set the Ritual Annihilation to the first level, which is 5 power to use the very first Ritual Annihilation. Set the DK marker on the 0, and every player puts their score counter right next to the 0, ready to start scoring doom to start bringing about the end of the game and, oh yeah, and winning the game itself. Players will also need to grab their individual 6 spellbooks, which are unique to their faction, and again, that's one of the cool things about Cthulhu Wars. Everything about this game is every single faction is extremely unique and very asymmetric. So I don't want to cover every single one of the factions themselves, but I do want to bring you a couple details on every one of these faction boards that are really important. So I just want to cover a couple little things very, very quickly. So let's bring everything down from the camera and look at these faction boards individually themselves. Now, every single player's faction board is broken down in a couple different areas. I'll just go and explain these all very, very quickly. First, along the top is we're going to have our power track. Now, your power track allows you to perform every single action in the game. every single action in the game pretty much costs a certain amount of power to use. Now that's not 100% accurate, but pretty much that's a fairly universal rule in this game. And you're going to track your power on this board right here, or this part of the board right here. Now understand that this track is not a finite total, so if you happen to have a starter turn with more than 20 power, probably not going to happen with these two factions are in this base set, but trust me, there are some factions that can do so. You will wrap the power track all the way across. So it's possible to start a turn with 27 power. Well, probably not going to happen the first couple times you play the game, but understand it is something that does happen. So this power track does wrap around, and once it goes all the way down to 0, you're not allowed to take any actions anymore on your turn unless you find a way to get power back. Now there are ways to do that, not in this base set, but I just want to let you know there are ways to get power back which allow you to come back into the game on future turns. But understand that anytime that you start your turn with 0 power in this game, you will, instead of taking your turn, you're going to advance the DK marker. Now I'm going to explain the DK marker later, but just understand that if it's a game between the Black Goat and Great Cthulhu, and Black Goat has spent their last bit of power, then it's going to be Great Cthulhu's turn as long as they have power left. And then when it comes back to Black Goat, since they have 0 power, instead of taking any actions at all, they are simply going to advance the DK marker. Now the DK marker I'll explain a lot better in a little bit future segment on this tutorial video, but understand that the level of the DK marker is the amount of power a player must spend before they can start their turn. So the DK marker starts at 1. Before you take any actions on your turn, you must spend 1 power. And if you can't pay for the DK marker, you must spend all the remaining power and end your turn. So in a 2-player game, once that DK marker starts moving, understand your turns are going to be very, very limited very, very quickly. Next up, we have a special power that every single faction has that's in play from the very start of the game. Now every one of these factions has a unique power, and they're going to have various different terms such as ongoing, combat, or something like that. And that basically specifies when that power is going to work. Now it's very nice for the base set right here. We see that Black Goat and Great Cthulhu both start with ongoing powers, meaning that they're in play at all times. Now you don't have to activate these powers unless it specifically says this power is always in effect. If it doesn't specify that power's own effect, you do have the option of turning it off. Most of the time you're not going to, but that is an option that's available for you. But just read over what the power does. Every single one of these factions has a unique power. Just understand exactly what it does, and understand that these are going to add to the strength and the power of your faction. Next up is going to be setup. I already covered this, but it basically tells you that you're going to start with 8 power. You're going to start with 6 gates in play. You're going to start with 6 of your cultists in play, with 1 of your cultists on top of the gate, which is basically how you're starting with 8 power. Because gates are part of how you gain power. No longer how you gain doom, but they're definitely how you gain power, and power is how you're going to take your actions on your turn. Next up, we're going to have a section here that lists a little silhouette for every one of your faction monsters, cultists, and Great Old One. Now, these 2 base factions do only have 1 Great Old One, but there are factions that have multiple Great Old Ones. But just understand there is definitely a hierarchy, which means a cultist and a cultist from different factions are equal in each other. But a monster is a stronger hierarchy than a cultist, and a Great Old One is a stronger hierarchy when it comes to monsters and cultists. That's going to be very important when I discuss how to capture cultists later, but just understand that hierarchy does make a difference. Great Old Ones trump monsters, monsters trump cultists, and once we start including terrorists, not in this base set, just understand they're also going to be part of the hierarchy itself also. Next to this, you're going to see a cost, which is the amount of power it's going to cost to bring this unit into play. Now, some units have additional requirements to bring them into play. For example, to bring a monster of any kind into play, you must have a controlled gate in that area, which means your cultist has to be on top of that gate to summon any one of the monsters. But to bring a cultist into play, you just have to have any unit at all in that single location, which means it can be a Great Old One or a monster, you can bring out a cultist. But to bring out a monster or a Great Old One, you must have a controlled gate with an acolyte in that special section of the board to go ahead and do so. Next up, we're going to have the combat, which specifies how many combat dice you're going to roll for each one of those units per battle. So for example, if I happen to have a battle where I happen to have 3 Dark Young, when it comes to combat, I'm going to roll 6 combat dice for that battle. And again, I'm going to roll multiple dice for multiple units and total this all up for my total combat ability. Next up, we're going to have special powers for every one of our units. Now again, this is going to be unique for every one of our factions because this is a very asymmetric game. Meaning every one of these factions are going to have special powers that are going to work differently. Now sometimes it's going to mention a spellbook and the name of a spellbook. That's basically just saying that if you have that spellbook in play, it's probably going to change things on how this unit specifically works. Read that spellbook and it should pretty much explain how it finally works. And then finally, we're going to have a special section which is going to tell you how to awaken your Great Old One and the special combat abilities and any special ability you may have by putting that Great Old One into play. Understand your special power for your Great Old One is only in effect while that Great Old One is in play. That Great Old One is defeated, you lose access to that power until you resummon that Great Old One. Now these Great Old Ones can never be permanently killed, they can be removed from the map, but again, all you need to do is just pay the cost to summon them all over again and then you can bring them back onto the board. Finally, we're going to have a section for all of our spellbooks, and now every one of these sections has a requirement to get that spellbook into play. Now understand that these special sections are not tied to a specific spellbook. So I can get the Frenzy spellbook by completing this requirement, or this requirement, or this requirement, or this requirement, or this requirement. I don't have to put a special spellbook in a specific place. All I do is pick or find a specific requirement, and the moment I meet that requirement, I can go through any of my remaining spellbooks, pick one of those spellbooks, and place it in that spot. Now, once you gain a spellbook, you cannot lose it. So even if you no longer meet the requirements of the ability allowed you to get the spellbook in play, you're not going to lose a spellbook. And again, there are some factions that break that rule. But generally speaking, that once you get a spellbook into play, it's a permanent power added on your faction board that you have access to for the rest of the game. Again, meet the requirement, add the spellbook out there, and it's a permanent power for your faction for the rest of the game, and you are good to go. Now, before we go on any further, anywhere in this tutorial, it's a good time to explain a little bit of how this map is laid out, especially with the adjacency, because this is actually a planet. It's a round planet. Well, okay, it's kind of a village or the town of Innsmouth and everything like that, but just work with me here. It's supposed to represent a circular map of some kind. But just understand that when it comes to this map, if you ever see any symbols on opposite sides of the board, that means that those two sections of the board, those two locations, are connected 100%, which means when it comes to movement, it's going to work for the rules of adjacency. What that basically means is that if I happen to be in this section with my cultist, which is this symbol right here, I'm also technically in this section right here, which means if I pay 1 point of movement, when I move this cultist, I can move this cultist here. I could pay 1 point of movement and move this cultist here, but I could also pay 1 point of movement to move this cultist over here, because while I am in this section matching this yellow symbol right here, I am also technically in this section of the map also. It does not cost any points of movement to move from this section to this section, because they are literally the exact same section, even though they have different names. Now, I know it can be a little bit confusing, and I know Sandy Peterson went for a more thematic effect for the game. It would be a little bit less confusing if we kind of imagine that these are actually arrows, same colored arrows pointing to each side of the map, because that make a little bit more sense. Hopefully, if you think about it like that, such as a little bit of an arrow signifying that both these sections of the map are connected, that might make a little bit more sense to you, but just understand that these sections are committed or connected. So if I happen to be in this location right here, I can spend 1 point of movement to move all the way to Dunwich, because this section is also this section, and that's only one space away, completing my movement. Cthulhu Wars Duel is played out over rounds, and every single round is broken down into 4 individual phases. You have the action phase, you have the gather power phase, you have the determine first player phase, and then you have the doom phase. Now the game is going to play out over multiple rounds until somebody manages to reach the instant death on the Ritual of Annihilation track, or until somebody manages to get their victory point marker to 30 points or higher. Once either one of those things happen, that's going to be the end of the turn or the end of the round. I'll explain what the difference is between rounds and turns when we get to that point. But once that happens, that's going to be the end of the game, and then we're going to add up all our secret victory points through our Elder Signs or any other special abilities, and the person who actually has the most doom after that point is going to be the grand winner of the game. Now, in the game of Cthulhu Wars, you're going to get victory points in Cthulhu Wars Duel in a couple different ways. Now, I'm going to occasionally just say victory points, but when I'm talking about victory points, understand I'm talking about doom, because doom is the thematic version of the victory points in the game. But the couple different ways you can get victory points in this game is by doing a Ritual of Annihilation. Every time you do a Ritual of Annihilation, you're going to gain an amount of victory points based on the total amount of gates that your faction controls. Now, to control a faction, you have to have a unit on top of a specific gate that can specifically be on top of a gate itself. Now, I mentioned that very specific terminology because for most of the factions, only cultists can be on top of gates. That's not true for the Black Goat faction. The Black Goat actually has a unit that can also be on top of gates, and that's explained on the rules and their spell card. But just understand that for every single one of your units that can be on top of a gate, they're going to control a gate. And when you do a Ritual of Annihilation, you're going to get a certain amount of victory points based on the total amount of gates you control. Not uncontrolled gates, gates you control yourself. Additionally, you're also going to gain victory points every single time you force an enemy to have a unit eliminated or killed from an action that you perform. Now, it's an action you performed against your enemy. That doesn't mean that I can go ahead and sacrifice 2 of my cultists for the Black Goat's power, get the ability of that power, and oh yeah, I get the victory points for these cultists I sacrificed. No, you only gain victory points whenever you cause an enemy unit to be eliminated or killed in some manner, whether it happens to be a special power such as Devour or something along those lines. If it causes a unit to be eliminated or killed and it's an enemy unit, you're going to gain victory points based on the total cost of that unit to bring into play. Now, that gets a little bit confusing when you have units that have multiple different power costs, such as Great Cthulhu himself. Now, Great Cthulhu himself costs 10 power to bring into play the first time. Each additional summoning only costs 4 power. So to figure out how many victory points you're going to get for defeating that specific unit, you're going to add up all the total split different costs, and then you're going to average them out. So for example, Great Cthulhu, every time you defeat him, he's going to be worth 7 victory points, even when it's the first summon or each additional summon, doesn't matter. He's going to be worth 7 victory points every time you defeat him. Or if you start looking at some of your other factions for Black Goat, when you get certain abilities, their costs go down. So you're going to take the average of those 2 costs and you always round up. So when it comes to Black Goat, they're always worth the same amount because that's just how math works. But just understand that anytime you have a faction that has multiple costs, it's going to be the average of all those costs rounded up. That's how many victory points they're going to be worth. Now, at the start of every single round, you have the action phase, and every action phase is going to complete with one player taking one action, then the next player taking an action. We're going to go back and forth, spending power, doing various different actions. Now, the important thing to understand is if during the action phase, if any player can get their victory point marker to 30 points or higher, the game is instantly going to come to an end at the end of that player's turn. The other player does not get the chance to take any actions. It's actually going to end there. Then both players are going to reveal any of their secret victory points, and then we're going to figure out who the winner of the game is. But during the action phase, the players are going to get the chance in turn order to take actions. And if it is your turn, the very first thing you need to do is to see if the decay marker has moved at all. If the decay marker has reached any levels at all, you are required to take and pay that amount of power equal to the current level of the decay marker. If you fail to pay or you cannot pay that amount, you must spend the remaining amount of power you have left over, and then your turn is going to come to an end. If the decay marker happens to be at 0 currently, or if it's at another level and you pay the amount of decay marker, then you can go ahead and take your turn. And on your turn, the basic way your turn is going to break up is you get to take as many unlimited actions as you want, then any regular single action, then as many unlimited actions as you want, and then your turn is going to end and it's going to go to the next player. Now, if you start your turn without any power at all, the only thing you can do is just end your turn. And if this is the second or future turns that you've had without power, then the only thing you're going to do on your turn is you are going to simply advance to the decay marker 1 space. Now again, that means that on the first or the immediate turn that you actually end your turn by spending any power you have left over or just deciding to do the pass action, you're not going to advance the decay marker. The decay marker is only going to advance if you start your turn with 0 power. If you start your turn with 0 power, you're simply going to advance the decay marker, end your turn, and then the next player gets to go by spending the current amount of power equal to the decay marker. And again, the decay marker is not going to go down. It's going to keep advancing every single round. So as your opponent keeps advancing the decay marker, it's going to keep going up. At the start of your turn, you have to spend that much power to take your action, which means the very first time that you spend the decay marker, you've wasted a total of 1 power. The second time your turn comes back around, you spent a total of 3 power for the decay marker. And then again, the next time you spent a total of 6, again, counting over the multiple rounds. What I'm just trying to emphasize here is the decay marker never resets back to 0. You must sacrifice that much power to keep the ability to even take your turn for that round. Now, the basic rules for Cthulhu Wars, there are a couple simple unlimited powers or unlimited actions available in the game. The very first unlimited action is you can either relinquish control of a gate or you can take control of a gate. It does not cost any power to do so, and generally speaking, only cultists can take control of a gate. But understand that the Black Goat does have a special unit that does have the special power to take control or to relinquish power of a gate, and again, that is an unlimited action. Now, generally speaking, this is going to be something that's going to be abused a lot by the Black Goat, because generally speaking, strategy-wise, talking about basic strategies, Black Goat is going to do their best to use their cultists to create gates and then give these gates over to their Dark Young who can gain control of the gate. Why would you want to do that? Because these actually have attack power and they also cannot be captured quite as easily. So removing these and moving them off and on in gates is an unlimited action, and that's one of the unlimited actions you can take. The second unlimited action you can take on your turn is this requires you have all 6 of your spellbooks on your player aid. Once you have all 6 of your spellbooks on your player aid, taking the battle action is an unlimited action, which means you can do as many battles as you want. But the only caveat to that is you cannot declare multiple battles in the same section of the board. So once I declare battle in this section, I cannot declare battle in this section anymore. But if I happen to have my units spread out, and yes, I do realize that cultists cannot attack. I'll explain that when we get to the battle rules itself. But once I have the unlimited battle action, because I've achieved all 6 of my spellbooks, I can declare a battle here, and a battle here, and a battle here, and a battle here. It's an unlimited action. It does not use up my 1 action for every single turn. So those are the 2 basic unlimited actions. Now understand, some factions also have some additional unlimited actions, but the basic flow of your turn is you're going to take as many unlimited actions as you want, take your 1 actual action, and then you're going to take as many unlimited actions as you want, and then your turn is going to go and end. And we're going to move up to the next player who's either going to take an action, decide to pass, or again, we're going to manipulate the decay marker, whatever happens to be at that case. Let's go ahead and cover all the actions for your turn that are available to you that are not unlimited actions. The first action available to any player in the game is the ability to summon a cultist. Now, you are limited to the amount of units that come with your faction in every single game. So it does mean that Cthulhu, for example, can never have more than 6 cultists. You can never have more than 1 Great Cthulhu in play. You can never have more than 4 Deep Ones in play, 2 Shoggoths, 2 Starspawn. That's specifically for your specific faction right there. So once you reach the total amount of faction units available on the board, you can never bring any more into play. Of course, when they get killed, defeated, or eliminated, you can start summoning them on future turns, but just understand you are limited to the units on the board. So to summon a cultist onto the board, you need to have 1 back in your supply, and the only requirement it costs to summon a cultist is you are simply going to spend 1 power on your turn, and then you are going to summon a cultist into any area on the board where you currently have a unit. So that means that if I happen to have a star spawn right here, I can spend the 1 power and summon a cultist right here, or I can spend the 1 power and I can summon a cultist right here. Again, the only requirement is I have to have any kind of unit in a special area when I would bring out a cultist. Even Great Cthulhu can be right here on the board, and if I have 1 in my available supply, I can spend 1 power right now and bring a cultist out of this section. Probably a good idea because they're going to have a lot of protection in that instance, but it's a simple cost of 1 power to bring a cultist out into any area where you currently have at least 1 unit on the board. The next action you can take is you can summon a unit besides a cultist, basically a monster, to any location on the board. I'm saying basically a monster because there are terrors available in the game which are a completely different unit. They're not covered in the base game. I just want to let you know that they do exist in case that it comes out in future questions or future expansions or anything along those lines. But to summon any kind of monster on any kind of location, it requires 2 things. 1, you have to have a cultist in that area, and that cultist has to control a gate. So that specifically means if I happen to have this cultist right here, I cannot summon any monsters in this location because I do not control a gate in this area. And if I happen to have a cultist right here, again, I cannot summon a monster in this area because I don't control a gate in this area. In this current board structure right now, the only place that we can summon a monster is right here because we control 1 gate in that area. And to summon a monster, you're going to only summon 1 monster per action, unless you have a special ability that allows you to break that rule, like Black Goat does. But generally speaking, you're going to spend 1 action to summon 1 monster, and the cost of that monster will be listed on the card. You're simply going to spend that power and cost, and you're going to bring that monster out onto the board on a location where you currently have a controlled gate. The next action you take on your turn is to summon your Great Old One. Now, this is kind of a gray area because most of these Great Old Ones have multiple requirements to summon them, and I can't go over all 11 different factions of how to summon all these Great Old Ones. The easiest thing for me to tell you is just to simply look at the bottom of your faction sheet. It's going to tell you the requirements. I can tell you some general requirements are pretty standard for most of the Great Old Ones, though. Generally speaking, they require you to control a gate, and they, generally speaking, that Great Old One can only go in that specific location where that controlled gate happens to exist. Now, some Great Old Ones have extra requirements, such as Shub-Niggurath requires you actually sacrifice cultists to bring her into play on top of spending the power. Some other factions have different special requirements, or they require you to do extra different things. But basically speaking, just look at your Great Old One sheet. It's going to tell you exactly what you need to do to bring your Great Old One into play. Pay some power, have a certain requirement, and then your Great Old One's going to come into play fully under your control on future turns. The next action you can take on your turn is to go ahead and build a gate somewhere on the board where there's not currently an active gate. Now, the one thing to understand about Cthulhu Wars is there can only be 1 gate per area anywhere on the board. And don't forget, these areas are effectively the same area. So that means if I build a gate in this area, I cannot then build a gate in this area because these areas are effectively, for all intents and purposes, connected, adjoined, pretty much the same location. But to create a gate, the only thing you need to do is have a cultist in an area where there are currently no gates. Then you're simply going to spend a 3 power, and once you spend the 3 power, you're going to put the gate in the same location. Then you may, after you've done your action, as an unlimited action, go ahead and take control of that gate if you like. Now, you don't have to. Strategically, you should, but again, you don't have to. But the only requirement is 3 power and 1 cultist in the area and no other gates in the area to go ahead and build a gate. The next action we have on our turn is going to be the move action. Now, the move action is a little bit unique in how the move action works. To perform the move action, you're going to announce how much power you're going to spend. And for every power that you spend and announce before you spend the power, you're going to move that many units 1 space away. And again, every unit can only move 1 space. So for example, if I want to move 4 different units on my turn, I'm simply going to announce that I'm moving 4 units. I'm going to spend 4 power. Then I'm going to pick 4 different units on the map anywhere, and they are simply going to move up to 1 space away. So in this example, let's say I spent 4 power. Let's say Great Cthulhu actually has a lot of power for me to spend to do these examples right here. I'm going to say I'm moving 4 units. I'm going to spend 4 power to go down from 14 down to 10. And then I'll take, this will be my first unit to move to an adjacent area. This will be my second unit to move to an adjacent area, because remember, these 2 areas are adjacent. So I'm effectively moving through here to here. That's my second point of movement. This will be my 3rd point of movement. And then my 4th point of movement will be to move this unit right here. Now, movement is very unique, unlike a lot of the other actions that you're going to take in your turn. You're going to spend a total amount of power and you're going to activate that many units. It's still only one single action, so don't get that confused. But basically, announce how much power you're going to spend and move that many units up to that one single space apiece. And again, you can pick any units anywhere on the board. Just no unit can move more than 1 space, and it's 1 power total per unit that you move. The next action we have is going to be the Capture Cultist action, and this is actually one of the fun, deep strategies of Cthulhu Wars, and one of the cool things about playing the game. To capture a cultist, it simply requires you to have a monster or a great old one in the same spot as an enemy cultist. And what you're going to do is you're just going to spend 1 power and announce that you're going to capture a cultist. And then when you capture a cultist, you end up spending the power, and your opponent picks the cultist that you're going to take, place it on your board, and then on a future end of this round phase, at the future end of this round, you get to actually sacrifice this cultist, return it to their owner to gain some power, and that's why you may want to do it. Now, the interesting thing about capturing cultists is it's not a battle action. That's the first important thing to understand about it. The second thing about capturing cultists is that cultists cannot be protected by an equal strength enemy monster. What that specifically means is that if I happen to have at least just 1 monster in the same space with these cultists, then this monster cannot perform a capture action. What you need is a creature with 1 hierarchy level up, which is going to be a great old one. So I happen to have this great old one right here in the same space with these other units. Then this great old one can initiate a capture action, because the great old one is higher hierarchy than this monster, meaning that the monster does not protect the capture. Again, I simply announce I'm doing a capture action, spend the power, and then I can go ahead and capture that unit. Now, great old ones trump basically great old ones, which basically means if you have a great old one in a space and your opponent has a great old one in a space, you can't do the capture option because you do not have the higher hierarchy, and that other great old one is going to protect your cultist. So to stop the capture of your cultist, you just need to have something that's equal power to your enemy in the same section. Then that opponent cannot do the capture option at all. The final option you can do on your turn, if you like, is you can decide to take the pass action. Now, the only way you take the pass action is if you have at least 1 power left over, and all you're going to do by taking the pass action is you're going to announce that you are burning all your remaining power, and then you are passing your turn for the rest of the round. This also means that your next opponent is going to take their turn, and then when it comes back to you, you got it, you're going to advance the decay marker, because you don't have any power anymore, and you are starting your turn without any power. Remember, when you start your turn with no power, the only thing you do is advance your decay marker, and then it goes back to the other player's turn, who then must spend that much power before they take an action. Then it's going to come back to you. Since you currently have no power, we're going to advance the decay marker again, and this player must spend that much power before they take any actions on their turn. Again, going to keep doing this, so that lets you know that this is a game where sometimes ending your turn early is not necessarily a bad strategy in Cthulhu Wars Duel, which is something that's a little bit unique to this game versus the granddaddy basic Cthulhu Wars game. The final action you can take on your turn is going to be the battle action. And I say the battle action for last because it's the one that can be occasionally the most confusing. Basically because the battle action can be an actual action or it can be an unlimited action, and that depends on if you have all 6 of your spellbooks. And understand you don't actually have to take battle as an unlimited action even if you do have all 6 of your spellbooks. Meaning that if all you want to do on your turn is just attack, you can take that as your actual action and still end your turn if you want. Now, the way a battle is going to work is if a player wants to enter a battle, they simply need to spend 1 power to do so. So if you have no power left over, you cannot initiate a battle. You can still be attacked, but you cannot initiate a battle. So to simply initiate a battle, you're going to spend 1 power and decide which area on the board you're going to initiate a battle. Now, the very important thing about initiating a battle is the only way you can initiate a battle is if you have at least 1 unit in that location that has at least 1 attack power. If all your units in area, for example, all these cultists in this area, they have 0 attack value without a special spellbook for Black Goat. But if they are, or this is the situation, Black Goat can't initiate battle. Of course, Cthulhu can do so because they have plenty of attack power with a good old Cthulhu that's available to him. Once you have initiated the battle by spending the power and again met that requirement of at least 1 unit in that area with an attack power, you as the attacker get to use any pre-battle abilities. Now, generally speaking, pre-battle abilities are going to be spellbooks or special abilities available to your specific units. and the attacker gets to initiate all their pre-battle abilities first. Once the attacker has used any and all pre-battle abilities that they actually want to use, then the defender gets to do the same. And it's very important that you do in this area. For example, if Cthulhu uses their Devour ability, and the Devour ability gets rid of this ghoul, that means this ghoul is going to be removed from the battle before they can do any of their pre-battle abilities, if they had one. I know it's not the greatest example, but if they had any pre-battle abilities, then we could actually use their pre-battle abilities if they're still alive. But if Great Cthulhu uses pre-battle to devour that unit, it never gets to do it since it's the defender and does not get to activate its pre-battle abilities until its turn. Once we've done any pre-battle abilities from both sides, again starting with the attacker, we're simply going to add up how many attack dice we get per side. And to figure that out, you just look at the total attack strength for your combat based on all the units you happen to have in this area. So if we go ahead and look at this, we see they have a star spawn that has an attack value of 3 dice. So it gives me 3 attack dice, and then we see that Cthulhu has an attack value of 6 dice. So that means I'm going to roll a total of 9 attack dice as the attacker in the circumstance. If I go over here and look at Shub-Niggurath, if this is the way it looks right now, after the pre-battle ability, the only thing I'm going to have is the attack dice from Shub-Niggurath. I'm not going to have any for my cultists unless I manage to unlock that spellbook, which allows me to have 1 attack value for each one of them. So to figure out my attack value, I'm going to simply look at my chart over here and figure out exactly how much combat I get to bring to the table. So in this example, we see that we're going to have a total attack value of 6 because we get 1 for every controlled gate. Oops, no, I'm going to fail at math here. No, I got it right, 6. So I have 1 controlled gate, which is going to be 1 attack, plus I have 5 cultists in play. That's going to give me a total of 6 attack dice. Now this basic game only comes with 10 attack dice, so we can't pull out more attack dice. But just understand we're at 9 attack dice versus 6 attack dice for the player over here. Once we figure out how many attack dice we're going to have, then each side is going to roll the total amount of dice for their combat value, starting with the attacker. And we're basically looking for 6s, which are kills, and 4s and 5s, which are pains. Now, the interesting thing about Cthulhu Wars is every single unit in the game, from the lowliest cultist all the way up to the great old one, can only take 1 kill result, unless they have a special power that breaks that rule. And Cthulhu does have a special power that breaks that rule, but I don't want to get into those little idiosyncrasies. It's going to be way beyond the concept of what this video is supposed to provide here. But we're simply going to roll all the dice that we have available to us, and then we're going to count how many kills we have, and then we're going to count how many pain results we have, and then we're going to pass the dice over to the next player who gets to roll the dice. So in this case, we got 1 kill result, and then we got 3 pain results. That leaves us 6 dice left over for Shub-Niggurath to go ahead and roll for their total attack value. So we'll roll that there, and we'll see that we got 1 kill result, and we are going to get 2 pain results there, and that's how we're going to satisfy that. Now we get to assign the kills, and we get to assign the pain results to both of our teams. But before that happens, we have some post-battle abilities that may or may not occur based on some factions that could be or may not be in the game. After we've handled any post-battle abilities, again starting with the attacker and then going with the defender, then we're going to assign all of our kill and our pain results. And again, you assign the results to your own units based on what your opponent happens to roll. So that basically means in this example, since Cthulhu scored 1 kill and 3 pain results, and Black Goat scored 1 kill and 2 pain results, let's go ahead and apply our kill results first. So since Red assigned 1 kill, I got to pick one of my units to kill. Well, obviously, I'm not going to kill my most powerful unit because that'd be dumb, at least in this circumstance. So I'm going to apply the kill result to this unit, remove it, goes back into my supply of available units I can summon. This die is spent. Let's go and pull off the board to go ahead and avoid confusion. Now we get to go over to the Cthulhu player. He gets to apply, or has 1 kill result. So Red gets to assign the kill result. Now the Red player can be dumb and assign the kill result to Shub, which would be dumb. So they're not going to do that. They're simply going to apply the kill result to one of their cultists, who will be killed and return back to their supply. Now that we've applied all the kill results, now we need to apply any pain results that happen to be. And again, we're going to do this starting with the attacker. So the attacker has 2 pain results. Since we only have 1 unit left on the board, we can basically go ahead and ignore that because we're only going to get 1 pain result because we don't have any units left over to suffer the additional pain results. So we're going to assign pain results starting against the attacker. And again, we have 2 pain results here. So myself as the attacker, since I assigned one of the pains to Cthulhu, I now need to pick an adjacent area where I need to flee to. The trick here is when you're fleeing with one of your units is you cannot flee to an area that possesses at least 1 unit from your opponent. So for example, if my opponent happened to have a unit here and my opponent happened to have a unit right here, I cannot flee to these 2 sections even though they're adjacent to this area. I would have to flee to this area. Whoops, that was kind of bad balance right there. I would have to flee to this area, or I have to flee to this area that happens to be adjacent. Now the trick here is if you cannot flee to any adjacent areas because all the adjacent areas contain at least one enemy unit, that means you need to suffer an additional kill result, which could, in this case, go ahead and kill your great old one. So be very careful, make sure you're not stuck in that circumstance. But if you have another unit to take that kill, you can go ahead and have that unit take that kill, and then any other units still left alive are going to remain in that area because they have no places left to flee. So that's it for the attacker, and then the defender gets to do the same thing. In this case, this defender happens to have 3 pain results against them, so they need to assign 3 pain results and send those units to adjacent areas that, again, do not contain an enemy unit. So we can send 1 right here, and let's go ahead and send 2 right there, and let's go ahead and send the 3rd unit right here, if that happened to be our battle results at the end of this battle. That's basically how to resolve a battle. The biggest trick about battles is understanding that when you initiate a battle, the attacker needs to spend 1 power to initiate the battle. The attacker only has to have at least 1 unit with an attack strength of at least 1 or greater. And once that's done, the attacker gets to do any pre-battle abilities. Then the defender gets to do pre-battle abilities. Then we're going to factor up how many dice we get to roll. We're going to roll the dice, figure out how many kills we get, how many pains we get, and then we're going to assign those pains and those kills to our own units based on what our enemy has rolled. And then we're going to do end of battle abilities. Then the attacker flees due to pains, and then the defender flees due to pains. Again, respecting the fact that you cannot flee into any area with an opposing unit, and if you have no places to flee, you have to take an additional kill result and stay in the same area. That's basically how battles are handled. That's it for the action phase. Next up is going to be the gather power phase for every single round. And the gather power phase is pretty darn simple, and I'm going to throw out a couple extra gates so I can go ahead and show you exactly how the gather power phase works in the game of Cthulhu Wars. And I'm going to give you the basic rundown of how it works. Understand there are some powers for some of these factions that do break this rule. Just basically look at your faction sheets. If they break the rules, just make sure you follow those extra steps based on your specific faction. But the basic way this is going to work on your turn, and all the players can do this simultaneously if you want, but if you're just learning the game, it's always a good idea to do this 1 player at a time so you make sure that nobody is missing anything exactly on how you're going to gain power. And basically, you're going to gain power based on certain criteria that exist with the current board state. The first thing you're going to do on your side, starting with 1 player at a time in this example, is you're going to gain 1 point of power for every single cultist you currently have actively in play on the board. Now, your cultist has to be in play on the board. If they happen to be captured by your opponent, or if they happen to be dead and in your dead pile, you do not get any power for them at all. But in this case, we're simply going to gain 1, 2, 3 power. I should have another cultist, 4 total power. So we will simply count up 4 total power for having 4 active cultists in play. Additionally, on top of this, you're going to gain 2 additional power for every controlled gate that you actually happen to possess. So you're getting power for the cultist and the controlled gate itself. So in this case, we see that Great Cthulhu has 2 controlled gates. That's going to be an additional 4 power. That's going to bring us all the way up to 8 power we're going to get for Great Cthulhu. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to get 1 power for every single captured cultist that we happen to have on our board. And this is the time when we're going to return those cultists to the other player. Now, it's important to understand that these are not kills and these are not eliminations, so make sure you're not getting victory points for capturing these cultists. But it does hamper your opponent and prevent them from getting power because they're not actively on the board. So you're simply going to return any and all cultists you have on your board from prior return captures back to their owner, back in their pool of available cultists. They do not go back onto the map. And you're going to gain 1 power for every single cultist that you happen to return to the enemy player. In this example, we're all the way up to 9 power for Cthulhu. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to gain 1 power for every single uncontrolled gate that happens to be on the board. So in this case, we see that there's 2 gates uncontrolled. Now, they have to be uncontrolled, cannot be controlled by an opponent. So we're going to gain 2 more power in this example, bring us all the way up to 11 power. And then finally, there could be any special powers or any special abilities all these factions have that can give you additional power. But again, those can be listed on your spellbooks and your racial faction board specifically. So make sure you read them so you understand how to play the game. After both of the players have figured out exactly how much power they have and return cultists back to their opponent and figure out what their current power levels are, we are going to enact the minimum power rule. And the minimum power rule says that no player can have less than half of the amount of player or amount of power as the person on the game who has the highest amount of power. That's the standard rules for the full game. Putting in a plainer speak for the Cthulhu Wars duel game is basically no player can have more than double the power of the other player. So for example, Black Goat has a horrible turn and only has 4 power after figuring out all the power because all their cultists happen to be destroyed. They don't happen to control any gates. And it was a pretty bad turn for that player. So basically all they gained was 1 power for the cultist and 3 power for, I guess in this case, yeah, let's take 1 more off to make this an easier example. 1 power plus 3 power for uncontrolled gates. That gives them a total of 4 power for that turn. That's a pretty terrible turn for them, but you can never have less than half rounded up with the amount of power of your opponent. So since Cthulhu happens to have 11 power, that means we're going to get a free boost in extra power, and that's the minimum power rule. The final thing we need to do on the gather power phase is if the decay marker has happened to move at all, it's simply going to reset back down to 0. And then we're going to end the gather power phase. We're going to go to the determine the first player order marker at this point. Now, I think I forgot to cover this at the beginning of the game, and this is very important. But in all games of Cthulhu Wars, if Great Cthulhu is ever in play, they always start every single game as the first player. And if the Windwalker ever starts the game in play, the Windwalker can never be the first player. So generally speaking, when you first start playing the game, you're playing with the base box, Cthulhu is always going to be the first player. But if you're playing with other factions, as long as it's not Windwalker, player orders generally determine any way you want to do it. But once we get to the first player order determination part of every single phase, we're now going to figure out the first player for the following round starting at this point right here. And that's a very important indication because it's going to matter for the Ritual of Annihilation. I'm about to explain in just 1 second here. But basically the way we figure out who's going to be the new first player is we figure out who currently has the most amount of power. Now whoever has the most power is the new first player, but if we're tied because both these players happen to have the exact same amount of power, it's the person who was the first player in the prior round gets to decide who wants to be the first player in the following round. And it's important to say that you get to decide. You're not automatically the person who gets the first player marker. And sometimes you don't always want to go first in this game. Sometimes you want to watch what the other player's doing. So if you have the most power, you have to go first. If you tie, it's decided by whoever was the first player in the prior round. After we decide who the first player is, it's now time for the Ritual of Annihilation. And again, this is a place where a lot of players are going to get victory points. It's also another spot where the game can come to an end if we reach instant death. Next up, we have the Ritual of Annihilation phase. And the Ritual of Annihilation phase comes after the new first player phase. So understand we could have a new first player who gets to do the Ritual of Annihilation first. That's a very important distinction here. But the way this is going to work is in player order, each player gets to decide if they want to do a Ritual of Annihilation. If a player wishes to do a Ritual of Annihilation, they spend as much power as the current level of the Ritual of Annihilation marker. Once they spend all that power, and again, that's going to affect their power going to the next round, but once they spend all of that power, they're going to perform the Ritual of Annihilation. And the way this is going to work is they're going to gain 1 victory point for every single controlled gate they happen to have on the board. And this is a departure from standard rules from Cthulhu Wars. You're only going to get victory points for controlled gates if you do a Ritual of Annihilation. It's only going to be 1 victory point per gate you control. So in this example, if we did a Ritual of Annihilation as Great Cthulhu for 5 power, we're going to gain 2 victory points only. And then we gain the 2 victory points, and then you're going to gain 1 Elder Sign face down without showing it to your opponent for every Great Old One you have in play. Now that means, generally speaking, with the factions come with this box set, that's going to be 1 Elder Sign, but do understand that there are other factions in the game that do have multiple Great Old Ones. Every one of these Elder Signs is going to be worth a victory point value of anywhere from 1 to all the way up to 3. There's 6 1s, 3 2s. No, I'm sorry. There's 6 1s, 4 2s, and 2 3s available in this pile right here. And you're simply going to look at how many victory points that has. You can always look at your own victory points, but you're never going to show them to your opponent. And you're simply going to place them on your board. And at any time you want, if you want, you can reveal these, even at the end game, once we reach this 30 point or more game over point. Even if that point has happened, you can always reveal these at any time to go ahead and gain victory points. Which means that if you want to be very, very sneaky on your turn, and let's say we're playing a normal round in the game, and the other player happens to have, let's say, like 24 victory points, at the start of your turn, you can simply reveal this Elder Sign, cash it in, get the 3 victory points, and call the end game right there. And remember, during the standard action phase, whoever gets to this point is going to end the turn right there. The other player does not get any further actions on that turn. So it'd be a very sneaky, very devious tactic. So understand that is something you can definitely do in Cthulhu Wars. So once you've done a Ritual Annihilation or decided not to, the other player in player order gets to decide if they want to do a Ritual Annihilation or not. Now do understand that if you decide not to, you can't change your mind after you see what your opponent does. You make your decision, the next person gets to go. If the next person decides they want to do a Ritual Annihilation, again, they're going to spend the cost right here, advance the marker, burn all their power all the way down, and then what they're going to do is gain victory points for every controlled gate, and again, gain an Elder Sign. That's basically it. And now at this point, we're going to have any special powers that may activate during the Ritual Annihilation phase, and some factions do have those powers. Again, look at your spell books, look at your faction boards for any special powers you may have, but that's the complete round for the game. Now, one final thing to add in about the Ritual Annihilation phase, if a player manages to go and advance this Ritual Annihilation track all the way up here to the instant death part right here on the board, that is going to be the last Ritual of Annihilation phase for the entire game, and after this phase, the game is going to come to an end. So that does mean that if Cthulhu happens to be the first player, and they happen to have the Ritual of Annihilation right here on the track, and they spend the 10 power right here, it will move to instant death. They will score their victory points. But the other player still gets the opportunity to also spend the 10 power and also do a Ritual of Annihilation, also gain victory points. But at that point, the game is going to come to an end. So very important distinction during the action phase. If somebody gets the 30 victory points, game over right there. During the Ritual Annihilation phase, you're going to complete the entire Ritual of Annihilation phase, making sure both players get the opportunity to do so. After we do that, we're going to add up all our victory points based on our Doom, based on our Elder Signs that we managed to collect, and then we're going to figure out who's going to be the grand winner of Cthulhu Wars Duel. Now, if you've played Cthulhu Wars many times before, hopefully you probably just fast forward to this section of the video, because most of the rest of the rules for Cthulhu Wars you already understand. In this part of the video, I'm going to cover what's different between basic Cthulhu Wars and Cthulhu Wars Duels itself, because there are some strange rules that are very important to understand. They're a little bit of a departure from the standard rules for the game. The first standard departure from the game is the map itself, which is a different, slightly unique map. Now, the layout of the map is a little bit different from the 3-player map. If you have the 3-player map from the basic Cthulhu Wars rules, it has a very slight difference, but the important thing to understand is how these different portals on either side of the map already work. Now, I described how they work in the tutorial video, but I'm going to repeat them here in case you decide to fast forward. But basically speaking, each one of these sections that happen to have the same symbol on them are the exact same sections, technically speaking, which means you can not put a portal in both these spots. If I built a portal here, I cannot build a portal here because technically both these spots are connected. If I happen to have a unit right here and I decide to spend 1 power to move, since these two sections are technically connected, I can move all the way from the Devil's Reef right here to move all the way to Dunwich, because again, both these sections are technically connected. And I can have both these players technically in both these sections because they are effectively the same area. Now, it would have been a little bit less confusing if they would actually put arrows here to make it less confusing for the players, but I think they went for the thematic approach, so just understand these areas are effectively the same area. Can't put a gate in both these, only one area because they're effectively connected. And movement means if I happen to be a Miskatonic river right now, for 1 power, I can move all the way over to Rockport because effectively these sections happen to be connected. The next thing to explain that's different from basic Cthulhu Wars happens to be the decay marker. Now, it's probably easier to go back into the video and watch the section where I talk about the decay marker, but I'll give you a really quick overview of exactly how decay works. Basically speaking, is if you start your turn with a 0 power, again, I emphasize if you start your turn with 0 power, the only thing you're going to do as your action is you're going to advance the decay marker. Then your opponent is going to start their turn and they have to pay that amount of power as a sacrifice in order to take their turn. So in this example, Cthulhu would have to spend 1 power to take their turn. That does not lower the decay marker. That's the important thing to understand. Then when it comes back to Black Ghost's turn, who happens to be out of power, they're also going to advance the decay marker 1 more time. Back to Cthulhu's turn, he now has to spend a sacrifice of 2 power before they take any actions on their turn. The important thing to understand here, though, is that if you cannot pay for the decay marker, you must spend the rest of your power, and that means you do not get to take your turn at all. So if we continue this example that we have going on right here, Black Ghost would again advance the decay marker on their turn, and we go back to Grey Cthulhu, who has 3 power left. They'd have to sacrifice all 3 of that power, which basically means they do not get a turn at all. The decay marker is a very important tool. Some factions, like Black Goat, can control this decay marker very well, so be very careful. It's a strong tool in your arsenal. Make sure you abuse the heck out of it in the rules for Cthulhu Wars Duel. The next unique rule to Cthulhu Wars Duel is the fact that you no longer automatically get victory points for controlled gates. You only get victory points if you do an Ritual of Annihilation, and again, you only get victory points for every controlled gate. Again, it's not an automatic free thing during the ritual phase. You have to actually perform the ritual to get any victory points for your controlled gates. The next thing that's very unique to this game is the fact that anytime you perform an elimination or a kill on an enemy unit, you gain victory points based on the cost to summon that unit into play, and that's a very important distinction. Again, it's for any eliminations and kills, so it doesn't work for captures or things along those lines, but you have to perform some kind of action that causes your enemy to lose a unit. So that basically means that Black Goat cannot be super duper cheap, get their spellbook by sacrificing 2 of their own cultists and gain 2 victory points. Doesn't work that way. As any one of your actions that cause an opponent to lose any units at all, for every unit they lose, they're going to lose. You're going to gain victory points based on the cost of that unit that they lose. The next 2 things are extremely important changes to the rules of Cthulhu Wars, so make sure you hear this very clearly because they're really important distinctions. The first important one is that when any single player gets all 6 of their spellbooks, that unlocks unlimited battles for both of our players. not just the person who got all 6 of their spell books. And finally, along those lines, you no longer need to have all 6 of your spell books to win the game. If you can manage to get up to 30 victory points or get that instant death part of the track, you can still win the game even if you don't have any spell books at all. Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen, but just understand that having all 6 of your spell books is no longer a requirement for winning the game. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spell books, doesn't matter. All you need to do is have the most victory points at the end of the game to win the grand game of Cthulhu Wars. Now, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you have enjoyed this video series. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments down below. I'll definitely get to them as quickly as I can. You can also feel free to email me off the shelf board game reviews. That's otsbgr@gmail.com. Be sure to answer your email as quickly as I can. If you enjoy this channel and you want to help keep the lights on, think about tossing a tip over in the jar over on Patreon. Patreon.com/otsbgr. Just $1 in the tip jar can help me keep the lights on and help keep content coming out for you. If you enjoy this video and you enjoy this video series, click that like button, click that subscribe button. As always, thanks for watching.